Tonight, we are going to dismantle an image you have been carrying since childhood. A picture drawn in a textbook, printed on a poster, animated in a documentary you half-watched before bed. The image of a small silver spacecraft, arms outstretched, sailing calmly through the black on its way to another star. It is one of the most beautiful pictures we have ever made of ourselves. A messenger, an emissary. A tiny piece of humanity flying patiently and forever toward the light of another sun. And it is almost entirely wrong, because here is the question we want you to sit with tonight. A question so strange, so quietly unsettling, that it may follow you into your dreams. In 40,000 years, when the last of us have long forgotten this small spacecraft, when every hand that built it has turned to dust, when every language that once named it has changed beyond recognition, where exactly will Voyager 1 be? You may think the answer is simple. You may picture it arriving somewhere, coasting past a distant sun, slipping quietly through an alien solar system. Something clean, something conclusive, something that feels like an ending. But what actually waits for Voyager 1, at the far edge of 40,000 years, is stranger than anything you have been shown. Stranger than most of us are prepared to imagine. And to understand it, we will have to leave behind almost everything we think we know about what this small machine is doing right now, tonight, as you sit here listening. Before we go any further, if this kind of slow, deep exploration is something you love, if this is the kind of story you come here for, a quiet like or a subscribe would help more than you might realize. It is a small thing for you. It is an enormous thing for a channel like this, and it lets these long, patient journeys find the people who are looking for them. No urgency, no promises to shout about, just a small gesture of thanks before we begin the real story. Because tonight, we are going somewhere far. We are going to look at Voyager 1 as it is at this exact moment. A wounded, dying craft trembling at the outer boundary of the sun's reach, sending back a whisper so faint it now takes nearly a full day to arrive. We are going to watch its instruments go dark, one by one, until only silence remains. We are going to follow it out past the last touch of the sun, past the last flicker of any signal, into a darkness so complete that no human eye will ever look upon it again. And then we are going to keep going. 10,000 years, 20,000, 40,000. We are going to meet the star that Voyager is supposedly flying toward. A star you have almost certainly never heard of, in a constellation almost no one can name, a small red ember in the far northern sky. And we are going to discover together that Voyager is not really going to that star at all. Something else is happening, something that flips the whole story on its head. Something that changes what the word travel even means. We are going to stand with Voyager at the moment of its so-called closest encounter, 40 millennia from now, and see what that word, close, actually means when the universe is doing the measuring. We are going to reach past that encounter into the deep future beyond, where Voyager becomes something no human eye or mind will ever recognize again. A relic, a fossil, a ghost of a species that briefly, in a single fragile century, learned how to leave. And by the end of the night, we will have to ask a question that seems small at first, but that sits at the very heart of all of this. A question you probably think you already know the answer to. Where does Voyager 1 end up? Where is it going? Where, in the vast and silent darkness of the galaxy, is it actually headed? The answer, we promise you, is not what you were taught, so let yourself settle. Lower the lights. Close your eyes if you need to. Nothing tonight requires your eyes. This is a story for the mind, and for the quiet part of you that still remembers looking up at the sky as a child and wondering what was actually out there. Because before we can talk about where Voyager 1 will be in 40,000 years, we have to talk about the image of it that you have been carrying without knowing it for most of your life. The one they painted for you in school. The one that has quietly, gently misled a whole generation of dreamers. That image, the small silver craft with the golden record, arms outstretched, sailing peacefully toward another sun, that image is not a picture of Voyager 1. It is a picture of what we wanted Voyager 1 to be. And tonight, we are going to see what it actually is. But before we take that first step, we have a small question for you. Something honest, something between us. When you first heard the name Voyager 1, how old were you? Was it a poster on a classroom wall? A page in a science book? A late-night documentary that stayed with you for years? Take a moment, if you would, and leave that memory somewhere in the comments below. It matters more than you might think, because everything you are about to hear tonight, every layer, every revelation, every quiet turn in the dark, begins with the image that was placed in your mind once, a long time ago. And that is where our journey has to begin, not out in the cold, not somewhere in interstellar space, but right here, in the memory of a small silver spacecraft that was never quite what you were told it was. So let us return for a moment to that first picture, the one you almost certainly remember. Because before we can travel 40,000 years into the future with Voyager 1, we first have to see, clearly and honestly, the version of it that has been living inside your head all along. Close your eyes for a moment and try to see it. The picture almost every one of us was given at some point without ever quite being told we were being given it. A small spacecraft, silver-bodied, delicate, almost fragile-looking. A wide circular dish at its front, like an open palm turned toward the stars. Long, thin arms reaching outward, ending in instruments that look like they were designed by someone who had read every book of science fiction ever written. And there, tucked against its side, a small golden disc catching a hint of imagined starlight. A record, a message. A greeting from a species you happen to be born into. The picture is moving in your mind. Not fast, not frantic, but with a kind of calm and steady purpose. Voyager 1 is going somewhere. That is the important part. That was always the important part. It is going somewhere. It is on its way to another star. That is the sentence in one form or another that most of us grew up hearing. Voyager 1 is on its way to the stars. Voyager 1 is the first human ambassador to the galaxy. Voyager 1 is carrying our voices, our music, our images, our maps into the great community of the cosmos. Somewhere out there, A distant sun is patiently waiting for its arrival, and a distant planet, perhaps, is waiting to receive our message. It is such a beautiful image. So beautiful that for decades, no one, not teachers, not documentaries, not the well-meaning writers of children's books, has really wanted to disturb it. And so the picture has settled into us. Quiet, comfortable, familiar. A little silver craft, arms outstretched, sailing toward another sun. And that picture is profoundly, deeply misleading. Let us start with the smallest lie and work our way outward. Voyager 1 does not, in any meaningful sense, have a destination. There is no star it was aimed at. There is no system it was pointed toward. There is no distant world sitting patiently at the end of a long dotted line drawn in the sky. When Voyager 1 was launched, in September of 1977, from a hot and humid Florida morning, there was no plan, no dream, no scientific ambition that involved another star at all. The plan was much smaller than that and in its own way much stranger. The plan was to look at planets. Voyager 1 was built to study Jupiter and Saturn's largest moon, Titan. That was the mission, not the stars, not the galaxy, not eternity. 2 planets and a moon. A few years of close encounters, a few thousand photographs, and then the plan quietly assumed the spacecraft would drift onward into the outer solar system and eventually into the dark, still very much within the influence of our own sun. What happened after that was not, at first, anyone's official concern. The gravitational assist that flung Voyager 1 out toward interstellar space was not chosen because someone was aiming at a particular star. It was chosen because it allowed the craft to fly close to Titan. That was the goal. That was the destination. A single moon orbiting a single planet in our own tidy little corner of the sky. And after that encounter, after Titan, Voyager 1 was flung, by the sheer geometry of the moment, upward and outward at a steep angle above the plane of our solar system, into a direction no one had specifically planned for it to go. Let that sink in. The trajectory that will define the next 40,000 years of Voyager 1's existence was not chosen. It was inherited. It is a leftover, a consequence of the fact that our engineers in the 1970s wanted a close look at a hazy orange moon. Everything that will happen to Voyager 1 for the rest of time, every distance it crosses, every star it drifts past, every millennium of silence it endures, is a side effect of that single ancient decision. A small yes to a single scientific curiosity, sending a small silver craft on a journey that no one at the time had really thought all the way through. Now, here is where the familiar picture starts to crack in a much deeper way. Because when people say Voyager 1 is heading toward a star, what they usually mean in the back of their minds is that Voyager 1 is on its way there, that it is closing the distance, that it is going to arrive. It is not. If Voyager 1 keeps moving at its current speed, about 17 kilometers per second, roughly 61,000 kilometers per hour, and if you asked it honestly to fly to the nearest star to our sun, the star system of Alpha Centauri, it would take somewhere in the neighborhood of 73,000 years to get there. And that is only true if Alpha Centauri stayed put, which it will not. And it is only true if Voyager 1 was aimed at Alpha Centauri, which it is not. Voyager 1 is not heading toward the nearest star. It is not heading toward the brightest star. It is not heading toward any of the stars whose names most of us learned as children. It is heading, more or less, toward a small patch of the sky in the direction of the constellation Ophiuchus, and beyond that into a region of the northern sky, where a very quiet, very small, very dim star waits. A star you almost certainly do not know the name of. A star we will meet in detail later tonight. A star that has been, all this time, the unwilling protagonist of a story it does not know it is starring in. But even that is not quite the truth, because Voyager 1 is not really going toward that star either. Not in the way you are imagining. The star, in fact, is coming to Voyager, but that is a revelation for later. For now, all we need to hold in our minds is this. The picture of Voyager 1 as a purposeful arrow drawn from Earth to some particular sun is a picture that was invented to make the story easier to tell. It was invented for us, for children, for classrooms, for television. It is a kindness in a way. A tidy story pinned onto a cosmos that does not much like tidy stories. The truth is quieter and larger. The truth is that Voyager 1 is drifting, not flying, not arriving, not journeying in the sense that you or I might journey somewhere with a suitcase and an address. Drifting, coasting, falling endlessly through a darkness that does not have a bottom. And here is the second layer of the familiar lie, the one that is almost more painful than the first because it involves the little silver craft itself. In our minds, Voyager 1 is timeless, frozen, perpetually new. It looks in our imagination exactly as it looked in every diagram we ever saw of it, as though it had just been polished and launched yesterday, and would look the same tomorrow and the day after, and 1,000 years from now. As though it were somehow outside of time. It is not. Voyager 1 is a machine. A profoundly delicate, profoundly beautiful machine, built by hand in the 1970s, powered by the slow warmth of decaying plutonium, held together by wiring and instructions and habits that have already lasted almost half a century. Every year, its power weakens. Every year, its instruments grow more fragile. Every year, its engineers on Earth have had to make hard, small decisions. Which sensor to turn off, which heater to sacrifice, which whisper of data to give up so that another whisper of data might survive. The Voyager 1 that exists tonight, at the moment you are hearing this, is not the shining ambassador of the textbooks. It is a tired, patient old craft, running on a fraction of the electricity it began with, its body slowly going cold in the dark. It has been alive, in the way that machines are alive, for longer than most people listening to this have been alive themselves. It is older than the phone in your hand, older than the internet, older than most of the countries whose flags fly on Earth today. And soon, sooner than most of us realize, it will fall silent, not with a dramatic explosion, not with a final transmission, but quietly, politely, the way an old radio left running in an empty room one day is simply no longer on. That is the machine that is going to make this 40,000-year journey we are here to talk about. Not a shining, eternal ambassador, a dying craft. A frail little body of aluminum and gold and hope, drifting outward through the dark, carrying a message it will never be able to explain. Now here is the third layer, and the deepest crack in the familiar picture. Because when we imagine Voyager 1 sailing toward another star, we imagine it being watched. We imagine, without quite realizing we are doing it, that someone is following its journey, that some future eye, human or otherwise, will be there to see it arrive, that the story has a witness, that the story has a listener, that the story in some way matters to someone at the other end. It does not. There is no one at Gliese 445. There is no one on any of the paths Voyager 1 will cross. As far as we know, in the entire 40,000-year corridor of drifting that stretches ahead of this little craft, there is not a single set of eyes waiting to see it pass. Not a single instrument on any world, if there are any worlds, that is turned in its direction. The golden record on its side with its greetings in 55 languages, with its recordings of laughter and heartbeats and rain. With its map to a small blue planet in a small yellow solar system, that record is very likely to travel through the entire 40,000 years and beyond without ever being seen by anyone at all. That is not a sad thought. Not exactly. It is a much bigger thought than sadness. It is a thought about scale, about silence, about what it means for something so full of meaning to move through a place that does not know how to receive meaning. Voyager 1 is not carrying a message to anyone. Voyager 1 is carrying a message into everything. And so, when we look at the picture in our heads again, the shining silver craft, arms outstretched on its way to another sun, we have to be gentle with ourselves. It is a beautiful picture. It is not, in a strict sense, false. The craft is real. The record is real. The journey is real. But it is a picture that leaves almost everything important out. It leaves out the fact that the journey has no destination. It leaves out the fact that the craft is old and dying and alone. It leaves out the fact that the darkness is deep and empty and without witnesses. It leaves out the strangeness of what 40,000 years actually means, out there, when the universe is doing the measuring. The picture, in short, is a kindness. And tonight, gently, patiently, we are going to set that kindness aside, not because it was wrong to give it to us, but because we are old enough now to see the truth beneath it. And the truth beneath it is stranger and quieter and more beautiful than any diagram could ever have been. So here is our question for you before we take the next step together. When you first saw that picture of Voyager 1, the little silver craft, arms outstretched, sailing toward another sun, what did you feel? Was it hope? Was it wonder? Was it a strange, quiet loneliness you could not quite name? If any of that comes back to you as you listen tonight, share it in the comments below. Just a sentence, just a memory. Because everything we are about to look at together begins with that first, small emotion that Voyager 1 planted in you, long before you knew what it really was. And now, having gently set the childhood picture aside, we have to do something harder. We have to look at Voyager 1 as it really is, tonight, right now, at this exact moment in its long life. Not as it was in the textbook, not as it will be in 40,000 years, but as it is at this precise second, silently doing what it has been doing for almost half a century, falling. Because before we can travel forward in time with Voyager 1, we have to meet it as it is today. A small, wounded, whispering craft, one full day of light away from home. So let us go there. Let us find it. Let us try, for a moment, to imagine where Voyager 1 actually is at the very second you are listening to these words. It is not easy. That is the first thing to say. Because when we picture Voyager 1 in our minds, we usually place it somewhere we can understand, somewhere with edges, somewhere with a horizon, a backdrop of stars, a hint of the sun over its shoulder. Something, anything to give it a sense of place. Out there, where it truly is, there is none of that. There is no horizon. There is no backdrop that would look like anything to a human eye. The stars are so far away that they are barely more than pinpricks, no closer and no different from the stars you see in your own sky tonight. The sun, from where Voyager 1 sits, is no longer a warm, generous fire. It is a single bright star, indistinguishable at first glance from the others, only slightly larger, only slightly steadier, only slightly more familiar than the rest. It gives no warmth. It gives almost no light. It is, from Voyager's perspective, just another star. That right there is the first crack in the familiar picture. Because in your mind, Voyager is still connected to us, still in orbit around the sun in some vague way. Still part of the solar system, in the sense that you can put a finger on a diagram and say, there, that is where it is. You cannot really do that anymore. Voyager 1 is, at this moment, somewhere around 25.9 billion kilometers from Earth. 25.9 billion. It is a number so large it stops meaning anything as soon as you try to hold it in your mind. So let us try to make it real. Let us slow it down. If the entire orbit of the Earth around the Sun were shrunk down to the size of a dinner plate, a plate you could hold in your two hands, Voyager 1, right now, would be about 80 meters away from that plate. Not 80 centimeters, not 8 meters. 80, farther than the length of a football field. That is how far Voyager 1 has traveled from the neighborhood of Earth. Farther than the length of a football field, in a solar system shrunk to the size of a plate you could set down on the table beside you. And it is still going. Every second it moves another 17 kilometers. Every hour another 61,000. Every day more than 500 million kilometers added to its distance from home. Voyager 1 is, right now, the fastest, farthest human-made thing that has ever existed. And it does not know it, and no one is there to congratulate it. Now, here is a fact that is going to feel like a small hand tightening quietly around your chest. Because Voyager 1 is so far away, the light itself, the very fastest thing there is in the universe, takes almost a full day to reach it from us. Almost a full day. Say something to Voyager 1 tonight in the quiet of your room. And even if your words could somehow ride on a beam of light, a real honest beam of light at the true speed of light, not slowed by anything, It would take almost 24 hours for those words to arrive, and another almost 24 hours for Voyager to answer. A full working week could pass on Earth in what for Voyager would count as a single simple conversation. A hello, a pause, a reply. In November of 2026, engineers on Earth marked a strange, silent milestone. Voyager 1 became the first thing built by human hands to sit exactly one full light day away from the world that made it. A full light day, not a light second like the moon, not a light minute like the sun, a light day. The distance that light, that untiring runner of the universe, can cover in a single spin of the Earth on its axis. Voyager 1, at that moment, quietly crossed a line that no other human object had ever crossed. And it did so alone in the dark, with almost no one on Earth stopping to notice. Let us stay with that for a moment, because there is something so tender and so strange about that particular milestone. A little craft, older than most of us, drifting through absolute silence, becoming, in one anonymous moment in November, the first thing our species has ever built to reach an entire day of light from home. And the milestone was invisible. There was no signal to mark it, no beacon, no sudden change, just the same steady 17 kilometers per second, the same faint whisper of data, the same patient old machine, doing what it has done every second of every day for nearly half a century. That is where Voyager 1 lives now. One full day of light from Earth, a distance so large that even the language we use to measure it has to bend to describe it. And every day, that distance grows. Now here is where the first crack in the familiar picture spreads wider. Because in our minds, Voyager 1 is not just far away. It is also somehow healthy, fully alive, fully awake, sending back a steady stream of pictures and discoveries and news. In our minds, it is like a friendly little dog trotting endlessly outward, tail wagging, still glancing over its shoulder to bark hello. It is not. Voyager 1 is a dying craft. That is a hard thing to say out loud, and it is not meant to be sad. It is simply, quietly true. The little machine has been running on the same source of power for its entire life. 3 small radioisotope generators, each one filled with a slow, warm heart of decaying plutonium. Plutonium-238. A material that, as it slowly falls apart, gives off just enough heat to be turned into just enough electricity to keep a spacecraft alive. In the beginning, that power was strong. Now, after nearly 50 years, it is fading. About 4 watts less every single year. 4 watts. Less than the power drawn by a single small light bulb. But out there, 4 watts a year is the difference between having an instrument and not having one. So the engineers on Earth, for decades now, have had to make a series of terrible, gentle choices. Which instrument do we turn off? Which sensor do we let go quiet? Which whisper of the universe do we agree together that Voyager will no longer be listening for? The cameras were the first to go, back in 1990, shortly after Voyager 1 turned around one last time and took the famous, aching photograph of the Earth as a single pale blue dot hanging in a sunbeam. After that, no more pictures. The eyes closed forever. Then over the years, other instruments followed, one by one, piece by piece, sensor by sensor. The cosmic ray subsystem quiet, the low-energy charged particle instrument quiet, heaters that once kept the electronics warm quiet, backup systems that once stood ready to take over in an emergency quiet. Tonight, as you listen, only 2 of Voyager 1's original scientific instruments are still awake. 2. Out of a whole ship full of them. A plasma wave subsystem, listening to the faint music of the gas between the stars. And a magnetometer, feeling for the invisible magnetic threads that run through the darkness. That is it. 2 small senses left in a body that once had many. A craft slowly losing its ability to feel the universe it is passing through. And Voyager 1 no longer has a backup for anything. Its thrusters, once redundant, are now single-string, as the engineers call it. Meaning if any one of them fails, there is no other to take over. Some of the fuel lines are clogged. Some of the systems that ought to have relief valves and second chances have used them up. Voyager 1 is, in the language of its engineers, held together by hope and habit. A machine designed for 5 years, still functioning after nearly 50. A ghost, in a sense, held together by discipline and love. Somewhere in the next few years, some estimates say 5, some say 10, some say a little more if we are gentle with it, the last of the power will fade. The last of the instruments will fall silent. The last of the heaters will go cold. And Voyager 1 will stop being a spacecraft in the way we use that word and start being something else. A dark object, a cooling body, a silent shape in the dark. We should be honest about what that will feel like from Earth, because Voyager 1 will not announce its ending. There will be no dramatic final transmission, no last words, no sudden loss of contact splashed across newspapers. What will happen, most likely, is much smaller than that. One day, someone in a control room at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California will send a routine command out into the sky. And a day later, when the reply should have come, no reply will come. And they will wait. And they will send again. And again, the answer will be silence. And after some period of patient trying, days perhaps, weeks perhaps, the mission will be declared gently and formally over. A signature on a document, a short sentence in a press release, a line in the history books, that will be all. But out there in the dark, Voyager 1 will still exist. That is what most of us do not quite realize. The end of the transmissions is not the end of the craft. Voyager 1 does not stop when we stop hearing from it. Voyager 1 keeps going. At the same 17 kilometers per second, on the same steady trajectory, into the same relentless dark. The only thing that will change at that moment is us. We will stop listening. It will not stop moving. That is a distinction that will matter enormously for the rest of tonight. Because everything we are about to discuss, every millennium of drift, every distant star, every silent encounter 40,000 years from now, takes place after Voyager 1 has gone quiet. The story we usually tell about Voyager is the story of the years when we can still hear it. The story we are going to tell tonight is the story of the years after we cannot. The much longer story. The much stranger story. the one that has almost never been told in full. Because think about it. In the entire lifespan of Voyager 1, the 50 years we have been listening to it, a lifespan we are almost proud of, almost boastful about, those 50 years are a tiny sliver of what is coming. 40,000 years lie ahead of it before the first significant stellar encounter. 40,000. Not 500 times the length of the mission so far. 800 times the length of the mission so far. And that is only the beginning. That is only the first, small, arbitrary marker in a journey that stretches on for millions of years beyond it. So think, for a moment, about that ratio, about that proportion, about the fact that everything we know about Voyager 1 today, everything we have ever seen or heard or learned from it, is a 50-year sliver at the very beginning of a life that will last for millions. That the 50 years we know are not the story. They are the prologue. The story itself has barely begun. And that is what makes the first crack in the familiar picture so important. Because the familiar picture ends at the transmission. The familiar picture assumes that when we stop hearing from Voyager, Voyager stops being. That when the signal fades, the story fades with it. But the signal is not the story. The signal is just the thin, fragile thread by which, for one small century, we happen to be able to know that the story was still happening. The story itself does not need us. It never did. There is something in that thought that is very hard to sit with, and also, somehow, very peaceful, because it means that Voyager 1, right now, at this exact moment as you listen, is not depending on us. It is not waiting for our commands. It is not looking back at us. It is simply, quietly, doing what it has been doing since the moment its rocket lifted off in the Florida heat almost 50 years ago. It is falling forward. It is drifting outward. It is being carried by the momentum that we once briefly gave it. And that momentum will carry it much, much further than any of us will live to see. So here is where we are. Voyager 1 tonight is one full day of light from Earth. It is 25.9 billion kilometers away and rising. It has 2 instruments left. Its power is fading. Its cameras have been closed for more than 35 years. Its backups are gone. Its engineers are counting years in the single digits. It is, in every honest sense, at the end of its life as a spacecraft, and also at the very beginning of its life as something else, something none of us have quite invented a word for yet, a drifter, a ghost, a patient, silent shape moving through the dark of a galaxy that does not know it is there. That is the small, brave thing we are going to travel forward in time with tonight, not the shining silver ambassador of the textbooks, not the polished new machine of the 1970s. This quiet, dying, almost tender little craft, moving one full light day out from a home that will not always be there to look for it. And so, before we take the next step, let us pause with a small question just between us. If you could send a single message to Voyager 1 tonight, one sentence, one wish, one small thing you would want to say to it before it goes fully silent, what would you say? Not to the people who built it, to the craft itself, to the little machine that has done more than it was ever asked to do and is still doing it right now in the dark. Leave your sentence in the comments below if you feel moved to. There is no wrong answer. And in a strange way, those small sentences you leave will travel too. Not physically, but in the record of who we were on this particular night listening. Because now we are ready to ask a question that most of us have never quite thought to ask. If Voyager 1 is drifting outward in a direction chosen almost by accident all those years ago, where exactly is it drifting to? What corner of the sky is it climbing into? Which star, if any, is it moving toward? And what does the word toward even mean, when the thing you are moving toward is also moving, and the whole galaxy beneath you both is turning slowly like a great and silent wheel? To answer that, we have to leave the neighborhood of the sun entirely. We have to lift our eyes above the plane of the planets, past the last touch of the solar wind, into a piece of the sky that most of us have never really looked at. Because Voyager 1 is not heading where you would guess. And it is not going where you think. And the star that waits for it 40,000 years from now is not the star that any of us grew up dreaming about. Let us go and find it. Look up. Not tonight necessarily, not this second, but sometime soon, on a clear evening, when the sky is dark enough to see more than just the brightest stars. Look up and let your eyes wander until you find, near the middle of the summer or early autumn sky in the northern hemisphere, a large, slightly awkward constellation shaped a little like a lopsided kite, or a strange, unfinished letter of an alphabet no one ever quite invented. That constellation is Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, an old figure from an old sky. Most people, when they scan the night, do not linger there. It sits between the more famous shapes. Scorpius, with its bright red heart, is nearby. Sagittarius, pointing quietly toward the center of our galaxy, is nearby. And Ophiuchus, tall and dim and often ignored, stands between them, holding the sky together in its own quiet way. That is the direction that Voyager 1 is moving, not toward a star inside that constellation exactly. Constellations, remember, are not real. They are patterns our ancestors drew across the sky, connecting stars that in truth have almost nothing to do with each other. Some of those stars are close to us. Others are impossibly far. They only look like a shape because our eyes flatten the whole three-dimensional universe into a single dome for our convenience. Voyager 1 is not heading into Ophiuchus in the way you might head into a room. It is heading through the piece of sky that we, from Earth, label with that name. It is climbing outward, above the plane of the planets, in that broad direction, and it has been climbing outward in that direction for almost 50 years. Let us slow down and look at that trajectory carefully, because it is stranger than most people realize. Our solar system, as you may already know, is mostly flat. If you could shrink it down and look at it from the side, it would look almost like a coin balanced on its edge. All the planets, from little Mercury to distant Neptune, orbit the sun in more or less the same plane, called the ecliptic. There are small tilts, small wobbles, small exceptions, but broadly speaking, the whole neighborhood is a great spinning disk. That is why in every schoolbook diagram the planets march across the page in a tidy horizontal line. It is not a lie. It is just very simplified. Voyager 1 does not live in that disk anymore. When it swung past Saturn in 1980 in the final large encounter of its planetary mission, Saturn's gravity did something strange. It bent the little craft's path upward, sharply, steeply. Not sideways in the way most of the other planets and probes wander. Upward, out of the plane, climbing at a steep angle like a swimmer breaking through the surface of a lake and leaving the water behind entirely. Voyager 1 is not moving along the disk of the solar system. It is moving above it, and it has been climbing ever since. That means, from a certain point of view, that Voyager 1 has been leaving behind more than just distance. It has been leaving behind a whole plane of familiarity. Every other planet, every asteroid, every comet you have ever heard of, lives, more or less, in that flat sheet of space near the Sun. Voyager 1 does not. Voyager 1 has climbed out of the neighborhood entirely. It sees the disk, in some sense, from above, and it is climbing in a very particular direction. If you take a very careful map of the sky and trace, in 3 dimensions, the exact line along which Voyager 1 is moving, you find that it points toward a spot high in the northern sky. Not toward any bright, famous star, not toward Vega, not toward Polaris, not toward any of the little clusters of stars you would recognize from a poster on a classroom wall. It points, roughly, into the constellation Ophiuchus, and beyond that, into a much smaller, much more obscure constellation whose name most people have never heard. The constellation is called Camelopardalis. Say it quietly. Cam, elo, par, dalis. It means in the Old Greek the giraffe. A creature the ancients found so strange, so gently absurd in its long neck and its short body, that when they were faced with a large, dim, hard to describe part of the sky near the celestial pole, they decided to name it after this odd, patchwork animal. Camelopardalis is one of the least famous constellations in the entire sky. It has no truly bright stars, no mythological hero, no dazzling nebula that people photograph. It is a corner of the sky most people, even amateur astronomers, will glance past without ever really seeing. And that is where Voyager 1 is going. Into the giraffe. There is something almost gently funny about that, and also, if you sit with it long enough, something almost heartbreaking. Because the little silver craft, the great ambassador of our species, the carrier of the golden record, the first thing we ever made to leave the sun's protective bubble, is not sailing toward a heroic star. It is not aimed at the beacon of Vega or the twin lights of Alpha Centauri or the red heart of Betelgeuse. It is drifting patiently, quietly, toward a piece of the sky named after a giraffe, a shy patch of stars that most humans never learn to name. And within that quiet corner, Voyager 1 has one destination, if you can even call it that. A single, small, dim red star. A star whose light is so weak that, from Earth, you cannot see it with the unaided eye. A star that has no romantic name, no ancient story, no place in any myth. A star that goes by the small technical labels our catalogs have given it. Its most common name is Gliese 445. Its slightly older name is AC +793888. Neither name has the ring of poetry. Neither has been carved into any temple. This is not a star anyone was singing about in ancient times. This is not a star anyone wrote a story about in the early years of astronomy. This is a star that, until very recently in human history, we barely knew existed at all. But Voyager 1 knows it. Or rather, Voyager 1's trajectory knows it. In a very quiet, very cold sense, the geometry of that little craft's motion has been aligned all this time with this particular small red star. Not perfectly, not intentionally, but well enough that, at some point, 40,000 or so years from now, the two of them are going to have something very much like an encounter. Now, we need to pause on that word, encounter, because we are used to it meaning something dramatic. Two friends meeting on a street, two ships meeting in a harbor, two lovers meeting after a long absence. When we say Voyager 1 is going to encounter Gliese 445, some part of us imagines the little craft sliding gracefully into orbit around the star, or brushing past its outer planets, or flying so close that we could, at least in principle, take a photograph. Something intimate, something meaningful, something that would count in the way we usually use the word count. That is not what is going to happen. We will come back to the details of that in a later section, but for now, let us just plant the seed. Voyager 1's closest approach to Gliese 445, 40,000 years from now, will be about 1.6 light years. 1.6 light years. That is farther than the distance between our Sun and its own nearest star today. Farther than the distance between Earth and Proxima Centauri. Farther than any human being can meaningfully picture. And that is the close encounter. That is the intimate moment. That is the meeting. So we should be careful with the word toward. Voyager 1 is drifting in the general direction of Gliese 445, yes. It is climbing through the sky toward the small, dim ember of that faint red star. But it is not going to get to Gliese 445 in the way that word suggests. It is going to pass at a distance so large that if the star were somehow able to notice, it would notice only the faintest flicker of a strange, cold thing moving through its outer darkness. A pinprick in the void, a dust mote against the black, nothing more. And yet, and here is where the whole picture bends in a way that most of us have never had explained to us. The story of that encounter is not really the story of Voyager 1 flying to a star. The story is much stranger than that. Because Voyager 1 is slow, let us be honest about this. Slow, out here in the vastness of interstellar space, is a very serious word. 17 kilometers per second sounds enormous on Earth. From a rocket engineer's perspective, it is enormous. From the perspective of the 61,000 kilometers per hour it becomes when we translate it, it feels almost like a boast. But out in the wider galaxy, 17 kilometers per second is a stroll. It is a shuffle. It is the pace at which stars themselves drift past one another. It is the speed of the local currents of the Milky Way. Voyager 1 is not tearing through the galaxy. Voyager 1 is quietly, patiently being carried along by it, like a leaf in a slow river. Meanwhile, Gliese 445 is not sitting still. That is the fact that changes everything. That is the small, quiet piece of information that flips the story on its head. Gliese 445, right now, is racing through space at a speed much greater than Voyager 1's. Not slightly greater, enormously greater. Something in the neighborhood of 119 kilometers per second relative to our sun. 7 times faster than the little craft that is supposedly going to meet it. And it is not moving randomly. It is moving more or less toward us, toward the sun, toward this little corner of the galaxy that we call home, toward Voyager 1. That is the reveal. That is the moment we have to sit with. Voyager 1 is not really flying to Gliese 445. Gliese 445 is flying to Voyager 1. Let that settle for a moment. Because in every diagram we ever grew up with, in every children's book, in every simple animation, the story was always the same. The spacecraft moves. The stars stand still. The craft is the traveler, and the destination is the fixed point, waiting patiently at the end of the line. That is the way we think about journeys. That is the way we think about arrival. Something moving and something waiting. But out in the galaxy, nothing is waiting. Everything is moving. The stars are not pinned to some invisible ceiling. They are all in motion, all the time, each one on its own long, slow orbit around the center of the Milky Way, each one carried by the currents of gravity and gas that make up our galaxy. Gliese 445 is falling on its own path through the dark, and its path, over the next 40,000 years or so, happens to swing very close to where our own little sun will be. Meanwhile, our sun, too, is moving, also on its own orbit, also being carried along. And meanwhile, Voyager 1, having climbed above the disk of our solar system, is drifting along its own quiet line, at its own quiet pace, into the middle of all of this. So the picture of Voyager 1 as a heroic arrow flying toward a distant target is not just simplistic. It is upside down. Voyager 1 is barely moving by galactic standards. It is Gliese 445 that is doing most of the work. It is the star that is closing the gap. It is the star that is coming to see what the little craft has to say, not the other way around. And there is something in that reversal that we should sit with. Because if you strip away the old picture and see the truth beneath it, what you find is much smaller and much stranger. You find a tiny cold body moving very slowly in a very particular direction, waiting. And you find a small red star moving much faster on a path that will, one day, sweep close by. Not because anyone planned it, not because anyone is guiding it, but because the two paths, drawn on the same map of the same slowly turning galaxy, simply happen to intersect. Two strangers, both drifting, one of them faster than the other, both quietly ending up in the same small piece of the dark at the same small piece of time. That is not a journey in the way a child imagines a journey. That is not an arrival in the way a child imagines an arrival. It is something quieter. It is something more like a coincidence. And it is something more like an appointment that no one made. An appointment that no one will keep. An appointment that will pass in silence, in cold, in the middle of nowhere. And now, standing here in the direction of Ophiuchus, looking upward and outward toward the faint patch of sky that hides the giraffe and its dim red inhabitant, we can start to see something that changes everything about what we thought was happening. Voyager 1 is not on a journey to a star. Voyager 1 is on a journey to a coincidence. A tiny, slow, patient body drifting into the future, hoping to be in a certain place at a certain time, not because it wants to be, not because it knows it will be, but because the physics of an old gravity assist and the physics of an old star happen to line up in a way that they, and only they and no one else in the universe, will notice. And so, before we take the next step together, let us pause for a small question just between us. Have you ever, on a night with a clear sky, tried to find one of the smaller, quieter constellations? Not the famous ones, not Orion, not the Big Dipper, but one of the shy, dim shapes tucked between them. Camelopardalis, maybe, or Ophiuchus, or Lynx, or Vulpecula, or any of the others whose names most people never quite learn. If you have ever gone looking for one of these forgotten corners of the sky, tell us about it in the comments below. What did you feel when you found it? What did you feel when you couldn't? Because there is something almost tender about the parts of the sky that no one talks about. And Voyager 1, of all the small things we have ever made, is drifting straight into one of them. And now, having found the direction, and having named the star, and having realized that the star is really doing most of the traveling, we still have to face something bigger. Because between here and that faint red encounter lies a stretch of time so vast, and a stretch of space so empty, that we barely have the words for it. 40,000 years. Almost the entire span of what we might, if we are generous, call human history. Cave paintings to today, and again and again and again, and Voyager 1 will still not have arrived. What happens in that long, silent middle? What is it like out there in the deep, quiet dark between the stars? What does Voyager 1 experience, if we can even use that word, during the endless thousands of years when it is not near anything at all? That, next, is where we have to go. So let us step together into the silence. Not the small silence of a quiet room, not the pleasant silence of a country night. A different silence. The silence that begins at the moment when the last signal from Voyager 1 fades from Earth's ears and is not replaced by anything. That moment is coming. It is not far away. Somewhere in the next handful of years, at some quiet hour on some ordinary day, the great dishes of the deep space network will send out the last of their patient commands, and no reply will come back. The engineers will wait. They will try again. They will send once more. And then, gently, they will accept that the little craft has finally gone dark. Not because it is broken in any dramatic way, not because anything has gone wrong, but because the small, warm heart of plutonium at its center has, at last, cooled below the level required to keep even one whisper of a transmitter alive. The mission will be declared over. There will be small ceremonies, a few articles, a moment of quiet applause in a control room in California. And then, life on Earth will move on as it always does, But Voyager 1 will not stop. That is the thing we have to hold on to tonight as we walk with it into the long dark. Voyager 1 will not stop. The end of its transmissions is not the end of the craft. When the last watt of power fades, when the last instrument falls silent, when the last engineer signs the final document, the little craft itself will still be there. Still moving at 17 kilometers per second, still climbing into that faint patch of sky, still carrying its golden record on its side, still doing what it has done every second of every day for nearly 50 years. Falling forward, drifting outward, being carried by an ancient push that no one alive today gave it. Only now, no one will be listening. Let us try to imagine that first century of silence. The first 100 years, in some ways, are the easiest to picture. The world Voyager was launched from is still mostly recognizable. Some of the countries are the same. Some of the languages are the same. Somewhere in an archive, the plans for the craft still exist. Somewhere in a photograph, its shining silver body still gleams as it did on that Florida morning in 1977. Somewhere, perhaps, a school child is being told the story of the little craft that once left the sun. Voyager 1 is still remembered. Meanwhile, out in the dark, Voyager 1 has moved another 5 billion kilometers or so. It has widened its distance from Earth by an amount that, on Earth, would sound almost meaningless. Another handful of billions on top of billions we could not really picture in the first place. The sun, from its perspective, has grown dimmer still, though only by a tiny amount. The stars, from its perspective, look almost exactly the same. There is nothing dramatic to see. There is nothing dramatic to feel. Only the same steady falling, the same steady dark. Now let us push forward. 500 years, 1,000. At 1,000 years past its launch, Voyager 1 will have moved outward by something on the order of a light week from the sun. A light week. The distance light itself can travel in 7 days. That sounds enormous, and by the standards of our solar system, it is. It is far beyond even the Oort cloud, the great slow shell of icy bodies that surrounds the sun at a distance most people never learn. Voyager 1 will, by that time, have long since left the last outer edge of anything gravitationally connected to the sun. It will be, in every meaningful sense, in interstellar space entirely. Deeply interstellar, not just crossing the boundary, adrift well beyond it. And on Earth, 1,000 years is a long time. Think of 1,000 years in the direction we can actually see. 1,000 years ago, on our world, the first cathedrals of medieval Europe were just beginning to rise. The Norse were still sailing to Iceland. Baghdad was one of the great cities of the world. The astronomers of the Islamic Golden Age were mapping the sky by hand, giving names to stars that most of us still use today. The compass had not yet reached Europe. Gunpowder was a new invention. The telescope was still hundreds of years away. That is 1,000 years. Look how much has changed in that stretch of time. Look how many empires have risen and fallen. Look how many languages have been born and forgotten. Voyager 1 will pass through that much time. And keep going, push further. 5,000 years. 5,000 years ago on Earth, the first great pyramids were being built. The wheel was still, in some places, a novelty. Writing itself, the very ability to make marks that could speak across time, was a young technology. There was no Rome. There was no Athens. There was no China as we know it. The map of humanity was completely different. 5,000 years is enough time to go from a world of scattered farmers to a world of nation-states with satellites and internet. Voyager 1, by 5,000 years past launch, will still have covered only a tiny fraction of the distance to Gliese 445. It will still be surrounded by absolute darkness, absolute cold, absolute silence. The stars around it will look almost the same as they do now, though a careful observer, if any could observe, might see the very first small hints of change. Certain nearby stars will have shifted by a hair. Certain patterns will have loosened slightly. But to the eye, if the little craft had eyes still, the sky would still look mostly familiar. 10,000 years. Now we are somewhere else entirely. 10,000 years ago, on Earth, our species was just beginning the great experiment of agriculture. The last ice age was ending. The oceans were rising. Great animals of the previous world, the mammoths and the giant sloths, were slipping quietly into extinction. Human beings were only just beginning to gather in the first villages that would, eventually, become the first cities. 10,000 years is nearly the entire span of what we call civilization. Everything we have ever built as a species, every wall, every road, every book, every empire, all of it fits, roughly, into that stretch of time. Voyager 1 will pass through the equivalent of all of that. And keep going. By 10,000 years past its launch, the little craft will have moved outward by roughly a fifth of a light year from the Sun. A fifth of a light year. In our old solar system diagrams, that would be so far off the page that no scale could even hint at it. But in the actual galaxy, it is still barely a beginning. Voyager 1 is still nowhere near Gliese 445. It is still nowhere near any other star. It is still, in the honest sense of the word, in the middle of nothing. And here is what we most need to sit with. That middle of nothing is very, very large. We are used to thinking of interstellar space as a kind of thin sea between the stars, dotted with occasional currents and clouds and objects. That is not really what it is. Interstellar space, in Voyager 1's part of the galaxy, is closer to a perfect emptiness than anything you can imagine on Earth. In a single cubic centimeter of the air you are breathing right now, there are something like 10 quintillion molecules. In a cubic centimeter of the space Voyager 1 is drifting through, there is, on average, less than one atom. A single atom. Sometimes not even that. Space is not merely empty by our standards. It is emptier than any vacuum any human being has ever created in a laboratory. Emptier than any place on or near Earth. Emptier than we know how to think about. And Voyager 1 in this near-perfect emptiness is passing through nothing. Endlessly. Not near a comet, not near a rock, not near a stray moon or a wandering planet, just moving through darkness, through silence, through the thin, cold breath of interstellar gas that surrounds it, so thin that if you tried to feel it with your hand, you would not feel it at all. The darkness itself is worth pausing on. Because the darkness Voyager 1 lives in is not the darkness of a night on Earth. On Earth, even on the darkest night, there are always sources of light. The moon, the air glow of our atmosphere, the scattered brightness of the Milky Way, the distant beacons of the planets, the subtle glow of the horizon. Out where Voyager 1 is now, and out where it will be for the entire 40,000 years to come, the darkness is much deeper. The sky it moves through has no atmosphere to glow, no moon to reflect. The sun is a single star among many, giving no useful light. The nearest planet is unimaginably distant. The nearest comet, hundreds of billions of kilometers away. There is nothing to reflect any light onto the surface of the little craft, nothing to cast a shadow, nothing to warm it. Voyager 1 exists essentially in a black room that stretches in every direction for a distance no human mind can hold. The only thing that changes out there is the position of the stars. Very, very slowly. Let us push again. 20,000 years. 20,000 years ago on Earth, the last ice age was at its coldest peak. Sheets of ice, kilometers thick, covered much of the northern world. Human beings were painting on cave walls in France and Spain. There were no farms, no cities, no writing. The world was cold and wild and mostly wordless. Now roll that same interval forward, from tonight to 20,000 years in the future. Whatever your imagination shows you, whatever your worries or hopes for our species, whatever you picture our descendants doing or failing to do, Voyager 1 will not know. It will not know if we are still here. It will not know if we are gone. It will not know if some brighter future has arrived or some darker one or none at all. It will simply keep moving. 20,000 more years of the same steady falling, the same 17 kilometers per second, the same silent climb into the giraffe. And by 20,000 years past launch, if you tracked its position carefully, you would see something small but interesting. The sky Voyager 1 sees is starting, at last, to change in noticeable ways. Certain nearby stars, over that stretch of time, have moved enough that their positions in its imagined sky have shifted. A star that was once slightly to one side is now slightly to the other. A cluster that once looked one way now looks another. The stars, as they always do, are drifting, just very, very slowly from Voyager 1's point of view. And one star in particular is drifting more than any of the others. Somewhere out there, faint and red, Gliese 445 is closing the distance. Not because Voyager 1 is racing toward it. Remember, we already saw that Voyager 1 is the slower of the two. Because Gliese 445 itself, on its own long orbit around the center of the galaxy, is falling in this general direction at more than 100 kilometers per second. And the Sun and Voyager 1 with it is drifting somewhat too. The two paths drawn on the great slow map of the galaxy are angling gently toward each other, not straight, not with any urgency, but steadily, reliably. The way two travelers on two country roads might one day, if they walked long enough, find themselves crossing at the same small bridge, without ever having planned to meet. 20,000 more years, 30,000. 30,000 years ago, on Earth, our species was still sharing the planet with at least one other kind of human. The Neanderthals, our tall, strong, gentle cousins, were nearing the very last centuries of their long story. Modern humans were spreading across Europe and Asia. The great cave paintings of Chauvet were being made. There were no crops, no towns. Just small bands of people, moving with the herds, singing at their fires, telling stories under skies that had no idea that, in 30,000 more of their own years, one of their descendants' would build a small silver craft and throw it quietly out among the stars. Now roll that same 30,000 years forward. Voyager 1 has been drifting alone, in absolute silence, in absolute cold, for that entire time. No one on Earth remembers it in any personal way. Whatever memory of it survives, if any, has passed through so many hands and so many translations, and so many changes that it is more legend than fact. The golden record on its side is still there, still intact, still gleaming faintly in the total dark, but the beings who assembled it are long gone from the surface of the earth in any recognizable form. Everyone who touched the disk has died. Everyone who ever heard the disk has died. Everyone who ever loved someone who worked on the mission has died. The mission itself is older by this point than any human memory can hold. And still, Voyager 1 falls forward. We must gently sit with what that means. Because there is something in that image that is almost impossible for the human mind to hold without flinching. A small object made by us, made with all our care, made with all our love out in the dark, unwatched, for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. Long, long after everyone who ever meant anything by it has died. And yet, and this is the part we have to protect ourselves from missing, that is not sadness, not quite. Because Voyager 1, in its silence, in its solitude, is doing something we very rarely get to see done at all. It is carrying meaning through time, not through communication, not through witnesses, through simple, patient survival. It is a thing we made that will outlast us. It is a fragment of who we were, still doing its small, silent job long after we no longer exist to notice. That is a very old form of magic. It is the same form of magic that lives in old buildings and in old books and in old carvings on old stones. The magic of continuing, the magic of remaining, the magic of being here still, when everything around you that used to know your name has gone. Voyager 1 has that magic, not through drama, through duration, through the simple fact of being small and cold and moving and not stopping. By the time we reach 35,000 years, Voyager 1 is finally starting to be somewhere in relation to something. Because now, in its imagined sky, one particular red star is no longer just a dim point of light lost among the others. It is brighter. It is closer. It is the first star in tens of thousands of years that has actually grown noticeably nearer. Gliese 445 is arriving. Not to Voyager 1 exactly. Remember, they are going to miss each other by more than 1.5 light years, but arriving at any rate in the same general region of the galaxy, approaching the same small piece of the dark at the same small piece of time. Two drifters from very different backgrounds on very different paths, finally within visual range of one another. If either of them had eyes, we can almost hear the closing music of a story at this point, almost feel the shape of a meeting, almost forget for a moment how very much emptiness still separates them. Because remember, 1.6 light-years at Voyager's crawling pace is farther than it has traveled in its entire life so far, several times over. The encounter, when it comes, is more like two distant ships noticing each other's mast tips over the horizon of a vast dark sea. Not a meeting, not a docking, a brief, silent recognition from very far away. But before we step into that final approach together, let us stop for a moment and let ourselves feel the weight of what we have just walked through. Because we have just walked in imagination through 40 times the entire span of recorded human history. Everything humans have ever written down, from the very first clay tablets to the very last post on the very last day of the last website, fits inside a fraction of the time Voyager 1 has spent doing the same simple thing, falling forward, drifting outward, existing quietly, alone in the dark. And here is our small question for you before we step into the encounter itself. If Voyager 1 outlives every person you have ever met, every language you have ever spoken, every book you have ever read, every song you have ever loved, and it will, then what would you want it to be a memory of? Not a message, not a document, not a set of facts, a memory. If in 20,000 years someone somewhere learned of Voyager 1 and wondered what kind of species had made it, what memory of us would you want the little craft to carry? Leave your answer in the comments below if you would. Because in a very quiet way, all of us who have ever known Voyager 1 are part of the memory it is carrying. And your answer tonight becomes a small part of that too. Now the long silent middle is nearly over. We have walked through the thousands of years. We have watched the sky slowly change. We have seen the little craft drift onward through emptiness so deep it should not be possible. And ahead of us now, at last, is the moment we have been walking toward. A moment of quiet proximity to another sun. A moment when Voyager 1, still cold, still silent, still carrying its unheard message, drifts through the outer darkness of a star system it will never enter and never touch. Let us go and see what that moment actually looks like. So here we are at last at the appointment no one made. 40,000 years or thereabouts past the moment we set the little craft loose. Give or take a few millennia. Give or take a few small errors in our maps of the sky. The exact number does not matter tonight. What matters is that we have arrived, in imagination, at the moment we have been walking toward all night. The moment of closest approach. The moment when Voyager 1 and Gliese 445 are at last, as near to one another as they are ever going to be. Let us slow down here. Let us slow down a lot. Because this moment, in a way, is the whole reason for this story, and if we rush through it, we will miss what it actually is. First, let us meet the star properly. Gliese 445 is, by almost every measure, an ordinary red dwarf. Small, cool, dim. Perhaps a quarter of the mass of our Sun, perhaps a third. Its surface is not hot enough to give off the bright, yellow-white light we are used to from our own star. It gives off a soft, deep red, closer to the glow of a coal that is halfway to going out than to the fierce shine of a summer noon. If you stood on a hypothetical planet in orbit around Gliese 445 and you looked up, your Sun would be a large, calm, ember-colored disk, hanging in a sky the color of dried blood. Everything around you would be lit in that same warm, tired red. Your shadow would be reddish. Your hands would look reddish. The world, in its own way, would be beautiful, but it would be a world lit by something quieter than the Sun we know. Gliese 445 is currently somewhere between 17 and 18 light years from us. Its exact distance shifts a little depending on which measurement you consult and which year you consult it in, because remember, it is moving, not slowly, not casually, fast. At more than 100 kilometers per second, tearing along its own orbit around the center of the Milky Way, on a path that is angling in our general direction. If you tried to see Gliese 445 tonight from a garden or a hillside, you would fail. You would need a telescope, and even then you would find only a very faint red point of light, indistinguishable to the untrained eye from thousands of other faint red points around it. There is nothing about Gliese 445 that stands out. It has no famous companion. It has no confirmed planets, at least none that we have detected as of this recording. It has no ancient story attached to it. It sits, quiet and unnoticed, in the corner of the sky named for the giraffe. It is one of the millions of small red dwarfs that make up the vast, quiet majority of the stars in our galaxy. Very common, very calm, very, very old. And it is toward this modest, patient star that our little craft has been drifting all these millennia. Now let us stand in imagination at the moment of closest approach. The distance between Voyager 1 and Gliese 445 at this moment is roughly 1.6 light years. Some estimates put it a little closer, some put it a little farther. The most careful modern calculations settle somewhere in that neighborhood, 1.6 light years. Let us take that number apart gently, because it needs to be taken apart. A light year is the distance light travels in 1 year. It is a distance so large that human beings have never invented a good analogy for it. But let us try. If you shrank the entire orbit of the Earth around the Sun down to the width of a single human hair, 1 light year would still be about half a kilometer wide. Half a kilometer. In a solar system reduced to the width of a hair, that is a single light year. And Voyager 1's closest approach to Gliese 445 is not 1 light year. It is 1.5, nearly 2. Now 1.5 light years out there in the empty vast is what we call in this story the encounter. That is the meeting. That is the arrival. That is the moment for which Voyager 1 has been drifting for 40,000 years. Let us compare it for a moment to something we already know. Right now, the nearest star to our Sun is Proxima Centauri, part of the Alpha Centauri system. Proxima Centauri sits about 4.2 light-years from us. That distance, 4.2 light-years, is one of the shortest distances between neighboring stars anywhere in this part of the galaxy. It is, in a very real sense, close. It is the closest a star gets, right now, to our Sun. Voyager 1's closest approach to Gliese 445 will be less than half that, about 1.6 light-years. Closer than Proxima Centauri is to us today. Which means, in one very strict sense, that Voyager 1 will one day be closer to Gliese 445 than any human being has ever been to any star other than our own. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite something. It is the closest any human-made thing will have come to another sun, up to that point in time, ever. And yet, and this is what we have to feel tonight, 1.5 light-years is still a distance that no human word for close really covers. It is still farther than any of us can meaningfully hold in our minds. It is still, from Voyager 1's perspective, a distance so vast that Gliese 445, even at the moment of closest approach, will not fill the sky. It will not blaze overhead. It will not even, most likely, be the brightest thing Voyager could see if Voyager could still see anything. It will be, for the little craft, one somewhat brighter red star in a sky full of them. A visitor, a near passing. A friend on the far side of a canyon. Let us stand in that image for a moment. It matters. The little silver craft drifting silently on. On its side, the golden record, cool as ever, still shining faintly in the dark. Ahead of it and to one side, the small red ember of a star that is nearer to it than any star has been to any human-made object before. Around it, still, that same absolute darkness. That same absolute cold. That same absolute silence. Nothing has changed about the emptiness that Voyager 1 lives in. All that has changed is that one of the many stars around it happens to be, for the moment, unusually close. Close by the standards of the galaxy. Not close by the standards of anything a human hand could reach. And here is where the encounter reveals itself as something stranger and quieter and far more beautiful than anything a diagram could show. Because Voyager 1 does not enter the Gliese 445 system. It does not, in any meaningful sense, come near any planet it might have, if it has planets. It does not skim the atmosphere of anything. It does not brush the outer edges of any solar system. It does not, in any way, become part of the small star's world. It stays outside. It stays in the deep. It stays in the interstellar dark that has always held it. That is the shape of the encounter. Two drifters, passing at a distance of 1.5 light-years, in the middle of a stretch of galaxy where no one is watching. If there is anything alive around Gliese 445, it will almost certainly not notice Voyager 1. The little craft is far too small, far too cold, far too dark to be detected from that far away, even by a civilization far more advanced than ours. Voyager 1 is, at the moment of closest approach, still less than the faintest speck against the black. If Gliese 445 had a full array of telescopes looking, they would not see it. If Gliese 445 had listeners listening, they would not hear it. There is no signal for it to send. There is no light for it to reflect. It is a mote, a grain, a cinder. And if there is anyone around Gliese 445, at all, which as far as we know there almost certainly is not, they will pass their entire lives, and their children's lives, and their grandchildren's lives, without ever knowing that a small silver thing from a distant blue world once drifted by in the outer dark. Let us sit with that, because in every human story about arrival there is always a witness, someone at the door, someone at the harbor, someone at the top of the hill, someone who sees the traveler and knows that they have come. In the story of Voyager 1's encounter with Gliese 445, there is no one, not most likely on any planet around the star. Not certainly back on Earth, 40,000 years and a whole civilization removed from us. Not, of course, on the craft itself, which will have been silent and cold for tens of thousands of years by then. The encounter happens, and no one anywhere sees it. That is a strange thing to build a story around. And yet, it is the story. Now here is a small detail worth adding, because it changes the meaning of the encounter in a quiet way. When Voyager 1 and Gliese 445 pass one another, Gliese 445 will not, at that moment, be 17 light-years from our own sun. It will be about 3.5 light-years from us, closer than Proxima Centauri is today. If human beings still exist, in some recognizable form, on some recognizable Earth, 40,000 years from now, and if any of them are still looking up, they will find Gliese 445 in their sky, and they will find it in a place slightly different from where it is tonight. Brighter, nearer. It may even briefly be the closest star to the sun, not by much, but by enough that the astronomers of that distant future, if they exist and if they care, will note it in their catalogs. And they will have no way of knowing, or almost no way of knowing, that a small ancient craft from their distant ancestors is, at that same moment, drifting through the outer darkness of that same nearby star. Two things approaching each other, and neither one being watched. There is something in that image, for me, that lands in a very particular place inside the chest, because it is a moment of profound intimacy, in a way. Two objects from very different origins having a private appointment in the dark. And it is a moment of profound solitude in another way. No witness, no record, no acknowledgement. It happens and it goes on happening, and then it stops happening, and no memory of it exists anywhere in the universe except perhaps in the abstract geometry of the paths themselves. That is the true shape of the closest approach, not a landing, not a flyby, not a discovery, a passing. A single quiet moment of proximity between two objects that will never meet again, because after that moment the distance begins to widen, gently at first, then more quickly. Gliese 445 continues on its own path through the galaxy, and Voyager 1 continues on its own. What was, for a small window in time, an unusually close pairing becomes once again a widening gap. A light-year and a half becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 5, 10, 50. 100. The little craft, having reached its closest star, begins the long, slow business of leaving it behind. Now, some of you may be thinking about the golden record. About whether, in this moment of relative closeness, there is any chance, however tiny, that some civilization around Gliese 445 might somehow detect the little craft. We should be honest about this. The answer is that we do not know, but almost certainly not. Voyager 1 is passive. It is not a beacon. It is not calling out. It is not glowing. It is not transmitting anything. It is simply a cold body drifting through space, of a size and temperature that would blend, from any distance greater than a few tens of astronomical units, into the background of the cold universe. Even if a civilization around Gliese 445 had built vast, patient telescopes specifically designed to sift the dark for cold objects, the odds of them finding Voyager 1 in the vast volume of space around their star would be almost unimaginably small. The golden record is not going to be received, not by anyone at Gliese 445, almost certainly not by anyone anywhere. But that is not quite the point of the golden record. The record was never really meant to be found. That is the quiet truth beneath the beautiful surface. Yes, it carries greetings in 55 languages. Yes, it carries music, from Bach to Chuck Berry, from a Peruvian wedding song to Indonesian gamelan. Yes, it carries the sounds of surf and thunder and children laughing, and a mother speaking to her newborn. Yes, it carries a map of pulsars pointing back to the sun. It was designed, on the surface, to be a message to whoever might one day open it. And yet, and this is where the record becomes something more than a message, everyone who worked on it knew, in their bones, that the chances of it ever being opened were so small as to be, in any practical sense, zero. The golden record was made for us. It was made for the people who put it together, in a small, brief, hopeful moment in the 1970s, choosing what a species might most want to say if it could say only one thing. It was made for the millions of children who would grow up hearing that a piece of Earth had been sent to the stars. It was made for the writers and dreamers who would carry it, in their imaginations, all the way out into the long dark. It was made for you, right now, listening, feeling something small and hard to name in your chest at the thought of it. The golden record is a message we sent to ourselves, using the stars as our envelope. And it works right now in this very moment because you are, in your own small way, receiving it. That is what the encounter with Gliese 445 really is on our end. Not an arrival, not a discovery, a reminder. A quiet, cold moment, tens of thousands of years in our future, when a message we once wrote to ourselves drifts, silently and unwitnessed, through the outer darkness of a small red star, and continues on its way. The message does not need to be read for it to be a message. The gesture does not need to be answered for it to be a gesture. Sometimes the point of reaching out is simply the reaching. Sometimes what matters most is not the meeting, but the willingness to walk toward one, even knowing that it may never happen. Voyager 1 is that willingness made physical. It is that reach, still moving, still ongoing, still stretching outward through the dark. Long after the hand that first extended it is gone. Let us stay with this for a moment longer, because the encounter with Gliese 445, once it is over, is not the end of the story. It is barely, in the great sweep of what is to come, a beginning. Voyager 1 does not stop after Gliese 445. Voyager 1 does not slow down after Gliese 445. Voyager 1 does not change course. It keeps drifting. It keeps falling forward. The little craft, having had its one moment of relative closeness to another sun, simply passes on, back into the deeper dark, on the same steady vector, at the same steady 17 kilometers per second. As though nothing has happened, as though there is nowhere in particular to go next. Because in the great honest truth of things there isn't. And so we should ask, before we take our next step together, what this encounter really is. Not what a textbook says it is. Not what a headline says it is. But what it is quietly in the great dark. And the answer, I think, is that it is a moment of unrequited tenderness. A hand held out in the dark toward a house whose lights are not on. A song sung, at a distance so vast that no ear will hear it but sung anyway. A pass. A passing. A brief, silent nearness between two objects that will drift apart forever afterward, and never know they were briefly close. If you have ever in your own life made a gesture like that, offered something to someone who would not receive it, sent a message to someone you knew, would not answer, given something to the universe not because you expected anything back, but simply because giving it felt right then, you already understand in your bones what Voyager 1 is doing at Gliese 445. You have already done a small version of the same thing yourself, and that, more than anything a textbook could tell you, is what makes the encounter matter. So here is our small question for you before we continue. Have you ever made a gesture like that in your own life? A letter you knew would never be answered. A gift you knew would never be acknowledged. A message you sent into the dark, not because you needed a reply, but because sending it was the right thing to do. Leave your story in the comments below if you feel moved to. Because those small human gestures, those little moments of unrequited tenderness, are, in a way, the exact same gesture Voyager 1 is making, in a much longer and colder version. And your stories tonight are part of that gesture too. And now, having passed Gliese 445, having watched the small red ember begin to fall behind us in the dark, we come to something even stranger. Because 40,000 years, as vast as it sounds, is only the very smallest opening chapter of what happens to Voyager 1 next. The little craft has been drifting for 40 millennia to reach one modest star at one modest distance. It has hundreds of thousands, and then millions, and then billions of years ahead of it, still to drift. Other stars will pass. Other encounters will happen. And in time, Voyager 1 will become something even the people who built it never imagined. Not a spacecraft, not a probe, not a messenger, something older, something stranger, something that no human word has quite been invented for. Let us follow it gently into the deep future. So Gliese 445 falls behind us in the dark, and Voyager 1 keeps drifting. That is worth saying again because it is easy to miss. Gliese 445 falls behind, and Voyager 1 does not stop. It does not slow. It does not turn. There is no gravity strong enough at that distance to hold onto it. There is no destination waiting to receive it. There is nothing on the other side of the encounter except more of the same, more dark, more silence. More 17 kilometers per second, hour after hour, year after year, into the endless quiet ahead. We have, in a way, reached the edge of what our imaginations were originally built to hold. 40,000 years is already a length of time that strains the human mind. Push past it, and the numbers begin to feel less like measurements and more like weather, something we live under, something that surrounds us without asking permission. And yet, past the encounter with Gliese 445, that is where we now have to go. Because the story of Voyager 1 does not end with its closest star, not even close. Let us begin gently. 300,000 years. 300,000 years past its launch, Voyager 1 will pass at a somewhat greater distance another small star. A star with a name even less romantic than Gliese 445. In the current catalogs, it goes by an identifier that reads more like a barcode than a name. Something like TYC 3135-52-1. There is no myth attached to it. There is no story. It is another quiet, dim body drifting on its own orbit through the Milky Way, another anonymous member of the vast crowd of small stars that make up most of our galaxy's population. And Voyager 1, 300,000 years from now, will drift within roughly 1 light-year of it. Closer, in fact, than it will come to Gliese 445. Think about that. 300,000 years. That is longer than modern humans have existed as a species. Our earliest anatomically modern ancestors, the ones whose bones we still find in ancient African cave systems, first appeared on this planet somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago. So imagine the entire span of humanity, from the very first person who could look at the stars with a mind like yours, all the way through every civilization that has ever risen and fallen, all the way to tonight, all the way to you sitting here listening. And then imagine that same length of time again, forward, into a future so distant we can barely picture it. That is how long Voyager 1 will drift before its second significant stellar encounter. And it will still be, at that moment, in the middle of nowhere. Still in the dark, still moving, still carrying the record, and still that is only the beginning. Push further. 1,000,000 years. 1,000,000 years is not, in any sense, an unusual number for a piece of interstellar hardware. Once a spacecraft has escaped the sun's gravitational grip, and out at Voyager 1's speed and direction it certainly has, then it enters a much larger and slower story. It joins the great procession of small objects that drift through the galaxy on their own long orbits around the galactic center. And those orbits, unlike the orbits of the planets around our sun, do not take a year to complete. They take hundreds of millions of years. Voyager 1 is not, from this point on, orbiting the Sun anymore. It is orbiting the Milky Way. Let that sit for a moment. Voyager 1 is not just leaving our solar system. It has already done that. Voyager 1 is entering a new orbit, one that circles the entire galaxy. It has become, in a sense we did not build it to be, a satellite of the Milky Way itself. A tiny cold body, drifting along on the same slow current that carries all the other quiet things in the galactic outskirts. It will circle the center of the Milky Way once every 230 million years, more or less. That is the timescale of its new orbit. Not a year, not a millennium, not a million years, a galactic year. And on that scale, 40,000 years is not even a heartbeat. It is barely a flicker. It is nothing at all. There is something in that thought that I want us to sit with carefully, because it is easy to skip over. We tend to think of the deep future in human units. We say, will humanity survive the next 1,000 years? Will Earth still be habitable in 10,000 years? What will the world be like in 100,000 years? These are, in cosmic terms, tiny questions. They are the kinds of questions a mayfly might ask about the summer. And Voyager 1, from this point in our story onward, is no longer in a story that answers to mayfly questions. It is in a story that answers to galactic ones. So let us zoom out further. 10 million years, 100 million. On timescales like these, the sky itself changes. The constellations we grew up with are gone, every one of them. The Big Dipper has drifted apart. Orion has scattered. The Southern Cross has come undone. The bright familiar patterns that human beings have looked up at for tens of thousands of years, that guided our sailors and our farmers and our poets, will simply cease to exist as recognizable shapes. Not because the stars have died, because the stars have moved. Each one drifting along on its own long path, at its own speed, in its own direction, until the shapes we knew are no more coherent than a handful of dust thrown gently onto a table. And Voyager 1 will drift through all of that, untouched by the changes, uncaring of them, on its own steady vector, in its own steady dark, at its own steady 17 kilometers per second. The stars around it changing places, the constellations dissolving and reforming into shapes no human has ever imagined, and the little craft still moving, still cold, still carrying its record. Now let us do something almost frightening. Let us push out to 1 billion years. 1 billion years from now, our own sun will still be shining, but it will have grown noticeably brighter and hotter. The Earth, by that time, is very likely to have become uninhabitable to complex life. The oceans will have begun to boil. The atmosphere will have thickened and changed. The green world we know, the world of forests and fish and songbirds and cities, will very likely be gone, not through any single dramatic event, simply through the slow, honest brightening of our star. 1 billion years is roughly the time scale on which our planet stops being a place where life like ours can flourish. And Voyager 1 in that billion years will still be out there, still drifting, still cold, still carrying its record, push further, 5 billion years. Now we are approaching the death of the sun itself. In roughly 5 billion years, our sun will run out of the hydrogen fuel that has kept it stable for the last 4.5. It will begin to swell into a red giant, growing to a size that will engulf Mercury and Venus and possibly Earth. Whatever is left of our planet by then, if anything is left at all, will be either swallowed by the swelling sun or scorched into a lifeless cinder. The solar system, as we know it, will not survive that transition intact. It will become something else, a different shape, a different story, and Voyager 1 will still be out there. Now here is a thing that is very hard to say without sounding like a poet, but I think it is important. Voyager 1 will very likely outlive the Earth, not metaphorically, literally. The little silver craft, the small piece of hand-built machinery that some engineers assembled in a workshop in the 1970s, will very likely still exist as a physical object after our planet is gone. That is not sentimentality. That is a straightforward consequence of the physics. Out in interstellar space, with almost nothing to erode it, almost nothing to strike it, almost nothing to break it, Voyager 1 does not decay quickly. There is no air to rust it, no water to corrode it, no sun close enough to cook it, no weather, no rain, no wind, no microorganisms. There is nothing out there that knows how to take Voyager 1 apart. The only real threats to it on those timescales are cosmic rays, which will slowly degrade its outer layers over the course of hundreds of millions of years. And the incredibly rare chance of a collision with an interstellar dust grain or some larger interstellar body, which, given the emptiness of the space it moves through, is astonishingly unlikely. Voyager 1 could drift for 1 billion years and still be recognizably itself. 2 billion, 5 billion. The little machine is, in its own quiet way, one of the most durable objects our species has ever made. Not because we built it to be, but because we built it, and then we sent it into a place where there is nothing at all to break it. Which means the golden record will still be there. Let us stay with this for a moment, because it matters. The golden record on the side of Voyager 1 was made with great care. It is a phonograph disc plated in gold, chosen for its resistance to the slow chemical damage that ordinary metals suffer. Attached to the record is a cartridge and a needle, along with instructions engraved on the cover for how to play it, along with a symbolic map showing the position of the Sun relative to 14 pulsars, along with a schematic of the hydrogen atom to explain the units used. It was designed from the beginning to last. The engineers who chose the materials estimated that the record itself, in the environment of interstellar space, should remain readable for something on the order of 1 billion years. 1 billion years. That is a stretch of time longer than the entire history of complex life on Earth so far, longer than plants have existed, longer than most of what we call evolution has been doing what it does. That small golden disk on the side of that small silver craft drifting through the dark was built to survive on a timescale longer than the entire biography of the biosphere that made it. And it will. There is a very good chance that long after our species is gone, long after every one of us has been dust for so long, that even the concept of dust seems too fresh long after the Earth itself has been swallowed or scorched by the swelling sun, that small golden disk will still be out there, still drifting, still carrying the same recorded greetings, the same recorded music, the same recorded heartbeats and laughter and rain, not because anyone will find it, not because anyone will hear it, but simply because it is there. It exists. It was made and it was sent, and no one out in the great emptiness has any reason or ability to take it apart. That is a strange and enormous kind of legacy. It is not the kind of legacy we usually think about. When we think of what will outlast us, we tend to think of our children and our children's children and the books they might read and the buildings they might live in. That is a legacy that lasts at best for a few thousand years. Voyager 1 offers something else. Not a legacy passed down through generations, a legacy simply left behind and continuing without anyone to pass it, a message that outlives the reader, a gift that outlives the giver, a song that continues after the song is forgotten. And now let us push, one more time, to the very edge of what we can say. On timescales of tens of billions of years, our galaxy itself will change. It will collide, gently but inexorably, with the great neighboring galaxy of Andromeda. Two vast wheels of stars, drifting toward each other across the intergalactic dark, will one day merge into a single, larger structure. The individual stars will almost never touch each other. Space is too big for that. But the great shapes of the galaxies will pass through one another, distort, and eventually settle into a new form. What we now call the Milky Way and what we now call Andromeda will become a single thing, a great slow merger of the two, which future astronomers, if any exist, have already given the working name Milkomeda. Voyager 1, if it still exists as a coherent object by then, and it very likely still does, will be part of that new galaxy, not by choice, simply by having drifted along with the currents that carry everything else. It will orbit whatever new galactic center emerges from the merger. It will pass among stars that were not born in our own galaxy. It will drift through regions of space that never existed in the form we know. It will be in every sense an emigrant from an older universe, still carrying with it the sound of surf on a beach on Earth, still carrying with it the sound of a child laughing, still carrying with it a greeting in Sumerian and Mandarin and Wu and Punjabi and English. And no one will hear any of it. That, honestly, is one of the most beautiful thoughts our species has ever produced. That a small handmade thing from one particular nervous, hopeful moment in the 20th century of one particular species on one particular planet will, unnoticed, unmourned, unremembered, drift through a different galaxy, still carrying our voices, still carrying our love, still carrying our best attempt to say hello to the universe. Not because anyone will hear the hello, because we said it. There is something in that thought that lands, for me, right in the middle of the chest. And I hope in some way that it lands for you too, because this, in the end, is what the little craft becomes. Not a spacecraft, not a probe, not a scientific instrument. It becomes, over the course of billions of years, the longest sentence our species has ever spoken. A slow, patient, drifting utterance, still moving, still meaning something, long after every mouth that helped to speak it has fallen silent. That is what Voyager 1 will be. That is what Voyager 1 is becoming every second, right now, as you sit and listen. The transition has already begun. The little craft is already halfway between what it was made to be and what it will end up being. It is already a message that has outlasted most of the specific ambitions that were poured into it. It is already older, in a sense, than the version of itself that its engineers built. It is already something none of them in 1977 had a full name for. And here is a small, quiet question for you, before we take the last step of this long journey together. If the golden record survives for 1 billion years, then all the small human moments encoded on it, the laughter, the greetings, the music, the words spoken by mothers to their newborn children, will outlast, on the physical level, almost anything else our species has ever produced. If you could put one small human moment into a message like that, one moment that you would want to survive for 1 billion years, what would it be? Not a grand achievement, not a historical event, a small human moment, a conversation, a meal, a song hummed by someone you love. Leave it in the comments below if you feel moved too. Because in a very real sense tonight, we are all putting our own small versions of the golden record together, in our own small ways, in our own private hearts. And now we are almost at the end of our story. Almost, but not quite. Because there is one last question that we have been quietly circling all night, and that we now together have to face. It is the question that was hidden inside the title of this video from the beginning. It is the question we thought we were answering, and that has turned out to be far stranger than we first realized. Where exactly will Voyager 1 be in 40,000 years? We have talked about the encounter with Gliese 445. We have talked about the drift beyond it. We have talked about the deep future, but we have not yet asked the strangest question of all, not where Voyager 1 will be, but whether the word where still means anything at all when we are talking about something like this, whether the question we thought we were asking is really a question at all, whether Voyager 1 is going anywhere in the way we usually use that word. Whether in the end the little craft has become something for which no map has ever been drawn. Let us take that last, quiet step together. So let us sit down, gently, with the question we thought we were asking all night. Where will Voyager 1 be in 40,000 years? It sounded like a simple question when we began. It sounded like the kind of question that should have an answer, a coordinate, a distance, a star, a place. Something you could point at on a map and say, there, that is where the little craft will be. Something you could hold in your hand, the way you hold a small marker on a globe. But somewhere along the way tonight, quietly, without any of us noticing exactly when, the question stopped being the kind of question it seemed to be. Because the more we followed Voyager 1, the more we realized that the little craft is not going anywhere. Let us say that again softly. Voyager 1 is not going anywhere, not in the way we usually mean it. It has no destination, it has no arrival, it has no address. The star we thought it was flying toward, Gliese 445, is a passing coincidence in the dark, and the little craft drifts on past that coincidence and continues into more dark, and more and more. There is no line drawn on any map that ends at Voyager 1's location because there is no ending. The line simply keeps going. The line becomes the story. The line is the whole thing. And so, when we ask where Voyager 1 will be in 40,000 years, we are asking a question that our language does not quite know how to answer. Because where, in the language we grew up with, means somewhere. It means a place. It means a spot on a map, surrounded by other spots on the same map, in a landscape that has edges and neighbors and names. Voyager 1, 40,000 years from now, will not be in a place like that. It will be in the middle of a vast dark region of the galaxy that has no name because no one has ever needed to name it. It will be somewhere between stars, closer to one small red one than most, but still farther from that one than any child could imagine being far. It will be in a spot that has never appeared on any human map, because no human map has ever included that spot. Where is Voyager 1 then? The honest answer is out there. That is the only answer we have. Out there, in the deep, in the dark, in the middle of the middle. And that tonight is the small and quiet revelation we have been walking toward, not a location, not a coordinate, not a star, a condition, a state of being. Voyager 1 in 40,000 years will not be at a place. Voyager 1 in 40,000 years will be a piece of the galaxy itself, not visiting the galaxy, being it. Drifting along on the same slow currents that carry every other cold, quiet thing between the stars. Part of the machinery, part of the fabric, part of the thin, endless breath of the Milky Way. That is what the little craft has become without our noticing. Not a spacecraft anymore. Not a probe. Not even really a messenger. Voyager 1 has become a piece of the galaxy. A small human-made piece of the galaxy, yes. A piece of the galaxy that was once, briefly, held in human hands, yes. But now and forever afterward, no different in essence from the other cold, quiet objects that make up the interstellar dark. It has joined the great slow procession. It has been absorbed. And that is not a diminishing. That is not a loss. It is, if we let it be, one of the strangest and gentlest kinds of belonging our species has ever achieved. We took a small piece of ourselves in the 1970s in a warm workshop full of engineers, and we set it loose. And it has, quietly and patiently, become part of something so much larger than the workshop that the workshop is no longer even a memory. That, in its own quiet way, is the story of every single one of us. Only for us the story is short, and for Voyager 1 the story is very, very long. So when we started tonight, we asked where Voyager 1 would be in 40,000 years. We should now, gently, admit that this was never really the question. The real question, hiding underneath the first one, was this: what happens to a small handmade thing when it is set loose into a place that is too big for it and given enough time to be forgotten? What happens to a made object when its makers and its purposes and its meanings all fade away and it just keeps going? What is left then of the thing itself? The answer we are learning together is that the thing itself is enough. Voyager 1 does not need a purpose to keep existing. Voyager 1 does not need a witness to be real. Voyager 1 does not need a destination to be beautiful. The little craft simply is, in the dark, falling forward, carrying its record, doing nothing dramatic, meaning nothing to anyone who is watching, and yet still somehow meaning everything to us right now in this quiet hour. That may be the deepest thing about this whole journey. Not the distances, though the distances are staggering. Not the timescales, though the timescales are staggering. Not the loneliness, though the loneliness is staggering. The deepest thing is that a small object made by a species can go on mattering long after it has stopped being watched. That meaning is not a property that requires an observer. That a hand held out in the dark still counts as a hand held out, even if no one takes it. There is something in that idea that quietly changes the way we can look at our own lives if we let it. Because we are, each of us, in our own smaller ways, also drifting, also carrying our own records, also passing quietly through a universe that mostly does not notice us, also making our small handmade gestures toward things we cannot see. And Voyager 1, whether it meant to or not, is a small mirror for that. A very slow, very cold, very distant mirror. A mirror we can look into on a night like tonight and see something small and true about ourselves. You are drifting too. That is not a sad thing to say. It is a simple thing. All of us on this quiet blue planet are being carried along on our own long trajectories through time and space. None of us know exactly where we will end up. None of us will arrive at any single fixed point. And yet, we are here, right now, doing what small things we do, sending our small messages into the world, hoping some of them will land somewhere and make a small warmth in some small heart. That is Voyager 1's story too. That is why the little craft feels, when we sit with it long enough, less like a spacecraft and more like a friend. So let us come back one last time to the picture we started with. The small silver craft, arms outstretched, sailing quietly through the black. Remember that image. Remember the version of it you carried into this evening. The heroic ambassador, the bright destination, the waiting star, the tidy story. Now let it go gently and see the picture as it really is. The small silver craft, arms outstretched, sailing quietly through a dark that has no edges, no destination, no waiting, just the moving, just the carrying, just the being. A small handmade thing, once held in warm hands, now drifting forever through the cold, doing nothing at all, and doing it more beautifully than anything else our species has ever made. That is where Voyager 1 will be in 40,000 years, not at a star, not at a place, not at an ending. It will be in the middle of the doing, in the middle of the drifting, in the middle of the long, patient, unwitnessed continuation. It will be where all the deepest and quietest things eventually end up, not somewhere, just being. And the little craft will not know that it is beautiful. That is our part. That is our job, to know on its behalf, to hold on its behalf, to feel on its behalf. Voyager 1 does not carry meaning outward. Voyager 1 carries the invitation for meaning outward. And whether that invitation is ever accepted out there by anyone is not what makes the invitation matter. What makes the invitation matter is that it was sent, and that, tonight, in the warm quiet of your listening, it is still, in a very quiet way, being received. Before we say our final good night, one last small thing. If this journey meant something to you, if you found yourself pulled a little further out of your usual thinking than you expected tonight, a quiet like or a subscribe would help this small channel keep telling stories like this one. It takes a long time to write a night like this. It takes a longer time to know that it is being listened to. Your small tap before you sleep becomes a small warm signal on our end, the same way Voyager 1's small signals were once a small warm signal on Earth's end. It is a tiny gesture. It matters more than you might think. And now, gently, our last words for the night. You have walked with a small silver craft across 40,000 years of darkness tonight. You have watched it climb out of the plane of the planets, drift past the last touch of the sun, cross a full day of light, fall silent, keep going and pass, in the deep future, an unremarkable red star in an unremarkable corner of the sky. You have watched it become part of the galaxy itself. You have watched it become, in a very quiet sense, a piece of us, still moving, long after the rest of us have grown still. Somewhere right now, as you settle down for the night, Voyager 1 is doing the same small thing it has been doing every second of your life. Falling forward, drifting outward, carrying its record, not stopping. It has been doing this while you were born. It will be doing this long after every one of us has gone. And there is something, I think, deeply comforting about that. Something warm, hidden inside all the cold. The universe is very, very large and very, very old and very, very quiet. And out in the middle of all of it, a small handmade thing from our small blue world is still moving, still carrying our hello, still being on our behalf, a small, patient, hopeful piece of us in the dark. So close your eyes now if you have not already. Let the day fall away. Let the small worries loosen. Let the room grow softer around you. And somewhere above your ceiling, somewhere beyond your sky, somewhere out past the planets and the sun and the last edge of the solar wind, a small silver craft is drifting quietly onward through the dark. Not alone. Not lost, just moving. Carrying on your behalf a little piece of Earth into the long night of the galaxy. Rest well now, rest gently. The little craft is still out there, still going, still carrying us with it. Sleep well under the stars. Good night.